Hi guys! So in case you're wondering what is this, because some people have asked, basically it's a glyph, and the meaning of it is to transcend, to overcome any kinds of boundaries and challenges either inflicted by people around you or you yourself. And it's a couple tattoo because my husband and I, we have it as well. He has it as well. Yeah! Anyway, in case some of you may not be aware, I have finally finished my master's dissertation journey. Alright? And all of it has actually come down to this lovely book over here. I took 2 years to complete this, 2 years worth of suffering, pain, agony, anguish, tragedy, lots and lots of emotive words and language, all inside and captured in this lovely book over here. Okay, so it was really a tough process. Anyway, this is about the time that my prof actually dropped me during the first part of my dissertation process. So, for those of you who are perhaps intending to consider taking a dissertation in masters, right, hear me out and perhaps hopefully take down some notes. I am a true blue Singaporean girl, so basically I did my entire education journey in Singapore and in Singapore alone, right from primary school all the way down to my postgraduate studies, apart from like a brief stint in the US where I did like a summer exchange. But other than that, I was really just in Singapore and in Singapore alone in terms of my education journey. So after I graduated from NTU psychology, I actually worked for a year. After a year, I decided that I needed to kind of deepen my knowledge and understanding of teaching. So I decided that I wanted to pursue Master of Education in NIE, NTU NIE, National Institute of Education, and I wanted to specialize in English literature. So I was actually the last batch to do English literature because after that, they actually combined the curriculum, English language and English literature together. So now if you wish to pursue a teacher education research in NIE, you probably would only see Master of Education English alone because they've kind of done away with the separation already. So at the end of my master route, basically you get to decide whether you wish to do a dissertation, whether you wish to pursue a dissertation route or a critical inquiry route. So the difference is that some people perceive critical inquiry to be like half of a dissertation in terms of the workload. So from what my friends have told me and my understanding is that critical inquiry is like you kind of do a research proposal based on whatever research you have been doing regarding the area of interest that you really enjoy, and then after that, once you do a research proposal, that is already actually done already. But for dissertation, what you have to do is to go through with the research that you have proposed. So after doing a research proposal, you need to make sure you get approval from the Institutional Review Board, I believe, IRB, to kind of give the approval that your research is ethical, it is valid, and is able to be implemented. And then after which you carry out the research. After the research, you have to write like a 15,000 word dissertation to kind of talk about what have you done throughout the research and what were your research findings. So for my case, even though I was working and studying at the same time, I decided to be a smartass and do a research in terms of dissertation. So I actually did a dissertation route, even though I knew that it was going to be very tough, but I really wanted to find out what exactly I really wanted to test my theory basically. I really wanted to kind of test whether whatever I have hypothesized, whether it is true, whether it is statistically significant, whether it really works or not. So that was kind of my motivation as to why I wanted to do a dissertation. I mean, for a critical inquiry, it's all good if you do a research proposal, but then, what if it doesn't work? You'll never find out. You never get to find out whether it works or not. So that was really one of my primary motivations to doing a dissertation route, even though I was very busy at that time in terms of working and studying. Thankfully, my boss was really very, very understanding. They actually allowed me to conduct my research at their site. They actually also kind of, especially my bosses, they were very supportive, and then they gave me a lot of support, and guidance wherever and whenever I needed it. So I was very, very fortunate in that sense. So here's the story. I had a supervisor prof, and the funny thing was that he was actually the one who volunteered to be my supervisor, because when he found out that he was the head of department, so when he found out that I was doing a dissertation and the area of interest in terms of my research, right, kind of overlapped with what he was interested in, he kind of offered and said, I could be your supervisor, and since we do have certain overlaps in terms of areas of interest, it may be mutually beneficial as well. So I was like, okay, sure, why not? I mean, I didn't really have anybody in mind, and I was pretty okay with this prof because I've taken his courses before, and he was a very witty, very, very brilliant, very smart prof, and I believe he was like trained overseas. He actually had like a double degree, double masters, PhD, I don't know. Okay, so basically he was very, very very brilliant, okay, very, very smart. And but a lot of times during his lessons, he always end up kind of like lamenting and griping about the Singapore education system. He's a bit subversive in that sense. He thinks that the Singapore system is very oppressive, very very bureaucratic, and then he's always like griping about student feedback forms and how like students give him very poor feedback and how he couldn't get over it, etc. So he was a bit snarky in that sense, but we all take it in good humor, But there are times where he didn't feel very well, and then he was telling us about how he feels a little bit burnt out, I guess. But things like that happen, in careers, in teaching. I think in every profession there will always be chances that you may feel burnt out, right? So I didn't take all this into account when I accepted him as my prof. He was actually a pretty good prof, So during the first part of my dissertation, I had a lot of issues with administrative work. I had a lot of issues with like trying to pin down what was my research focus, because my research focus was a bit too broad. So he helped me a lot with that, and so all of these things, he actually helped me make sure that I managed to get my approval, I managed to do what is needed, although some of the deadlines were pretty tough, and there were times where I had to kind of stay up like really, really late, even though I had work the next day, to actually kind of fulfill what he needed me to do in time. So that was insane. Yeah, I had a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of nights where I cried, because it was so insane. The deadlines were so tight. So but apart from that, he was very, very good. He wasn't like, those profs that we often hear, right? Like they will say they'll help you and then they go missing and then they come back again, and then, or like they tell you something and then they tell you to switch something else altogether, and that kind of thing, okay? So this prof wasn't like that. He was pretty nice, So about the turn of the year, so halfway through, so I submitted my research proposal, I got my approval, I conducted my research, I designed my test items, he helped me with that as well. Only about where I was getting to start writing my research paper, that was where, stuff happened, okay, shit happened. Okay, so there was this particular meeting that he mentioned things like, I think you really need to kind of narrow down your research focus and whatever you have written. So I started writing the research paper already, and he was saying things like, you may need to kind of narrow it down a little bit. You may need to be more focused. You may need to do a bit more research, and perhaps, in other words, a very subtle indication, right, to me to actually consider rewriting my first part of my paper, which I was like super dejected, super demotivated. I was like, oh my goodness, like I spent like so many weeks writing this first part of my paper, and now you're telling me to redo it. So I was like, okay, alright. And he was like, I will help you with like giving you some research articles so that you can kind of ensure that your research is in the right direction, etc. And I'll pass it to you. I will make sure to see you through the end of the entire dissertation. I was like, when I heard this phrase, like I'll make sure that I will see you through the entire dissertation, I was a bit like nothing rang in my head, no bells were ringing in my head, because I was more dejected at that point in time that I had to rewrite my paper. So it didn't occur to me that there was something going on. you know. So about 2-3 weeks later, I received an email from a new head of department. So he was the previous head of department, and then now he's the new head of department. So the new head of department kind of sent me an email about 2-3 weeks later, and he said like, we need you to come into office. You know, we need you to come into office because something has happened, and we perhaps need to discuss this better in face to face. So I was like, oh, okay. What's the issue? You know, is this something to do with my research or what happened? I didn't know. I had no idea. And I was pretty okay with the new head of department because I've also taken his lessons before, so I didn't really think too much about it. So when I went down, he told me, say that, oh, you know, the previous head of department, which is my previous supervisor, he basically kind of went off. So he went off, he was uncontactable, nobody can contact him. He basically threw in the letter of resignation and then fled the country, perhaps, I don't know. Okay, so we're not too sure what happened. Up to this day, I have no idea what happened. He could have gone overseas and decided to live his life as a fisherman or something, I don't know. Okay, but I presume or I assume that he had some kind of like a midlife crisis of some sort, you know, because he did, I mean, going back, reflecting back on the lessons that he had taught me, he did lament about how he feels a little bit like aimless, you know. He has achieved so many things, but he feels aimless sometimes, and then there's this huge bureaucracy thing, you know, in every typical institution in Singapore, right? So basically he left. And I was like, oh my goodness, what's gonna happen to me? I have absolutely no idea. And then basically a new head of department asked me like, where am I with my current dissertation process and all sorts of relevant questions to my dissertation. And then he mentioned that he would kind of hook me up with a new prof. So yeah, I managed to get a very good prof thereafter, and it's a she. She was very awesome. She was super on the ball. I love her work ethic. I would say perhaps, you know, the previous supervisor prof, him leaving was kind of a blessing in disguise. There was a silver lining in a sense, because like this current prof that I had, her work ethic was more suitable. I would say we are more matched in that sense, you know, complement my work ethic in a sense like she doesn't mind me asking her constantly for feedback. She gives me very clear directions, she gives me very clear instructions on how I should actually improve on my dissertation, and I thought that was something that I really needed, because I was basically a first timer when writing dissertation. I didn't know how or where to do what, you know, so she kind of guided me in that sense. I was very appreciative of the fact that she was my new supervisor. So here are my 3 pieces of advice for students who wish to pursue dissertation in Singapore, right? So I'm speaking more from a Singapore education background context, but I'm very sure that some of these pieces of advice would actually apply to you in the general context as well. Number 1, the first piece of advice is that it's going to be lonely, it's going to be a sad, lonely journey, and you have got to be okay with that. Okay, now there may be some individuals out there who will say, huh, but is this really true? Like, I could get a friend who also doing dissertation route and then we can kind of suffer together. I mean, yeah, that's true, but I've also heard of individuals where their friends started out with them on the same journey, but in the end, halfway through, they pulled out, and that pretty much leaves you alone. And also, if you are in Singapore and you're doing the dissertation in NIE, a lot of the times these dissertations are more focused on your own research, so you can't really tag team with someone else to actually conduct the research together, right? They have to have their own research, you have to have your own research as well. So it is going to be a lonely journey, because a lot of the challenges that you face are going to be faced by you alone, and you have to solve them by yourself. Yes, you may have pieces of advice, you may have certain guidance, certain support from like your mentors or peers or whoever you're working with at that point in time, but ultimately you have to be okay with battling through yourself. If you aren't that kind of person, that I would say perhaps dissertation may not be the best choice for you. Number 2, know your research well. There are a few ways to do your research. The first one being that of qualitative research design, where basically you conduct interviews with individuals. And the pro is that you don't really have to do with numbers. You don't need to calculate statistics per se. But the con would definitely be that of you have to go through this tedious process of transcribing, where you need to find common themes across your your group of interviewees, and then after which kind of break down whatever they have to say. The other or the second method of research design would be quantitative research design, where you basically have to design your own test items. You need to conduct your research, right? And then after which you need to collate the results, and then you need to apply like statistics or SPSS to actually come up or generate numbers to test whether it is statistically significant or not. So the pro would definitely be that it's definitely not as tedious as the qualitative design, but the con would be that you kind of need to do like a bit of research on what kind of tests you need to implement before you actually go ahead and kind of generate the results or the data, right? Because if you don't and you kind of mess things up, then you need to kind of redo it again, right? So these are the kind of typical research designs that we often do in higher education institutes. Right, so for my research, I did more of a mixed method. I actually did a quantitative first. So I started with like a pre-test, how are they like, and then after that, post-test. After I implemented certain intervention, I actually did a post-test. Then that was more of my quantitative. Then qualitative was more of like conducted interviews with like 3 to 4 students to find out what were their perceptions like, what were their attitudes towards English language and English literature. So that was basically my mixed method design. And I would say my greatest advice to those of you who are intending to do research is not to consider just what you're comfortable with, but more of what exactly your research needs, right? So let me give you a scenario to make things a little bit clearer. Like for example, like I'm a kind of person that I really cannot do well in quantitative. Okay, when I was in university, my stats module was I got a D for dumb. Okay, I got a D for my research stats. Thankfully it's still a pass, right? So that was fine. But when I actually did my postgrad and I realized that my research design, I needed to do I needed to do quantitative analysis. I needed to know how much my students have improved after I implemented that particular intervention. So it is definitely a must, and I decided that, hey, it doesn't mean I'm not comfortable with it, means that I shouldn't do it. I mean, I should definitely take it upon myself to go and research a little bit about it, figure out which test is most important or most appropriate, and then just implement it. And if I ever had any troubles or difficulties, I can always ask my prof. So that was the kind of mentality and mindset I was going with, and thankfully everything works out fine. But that was my greatest takeaway. Rather, it's not because of, just because you're not comfortable with it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, right? Perhaps that is ultimately the one that your research needs the most, instead of qualitative is quantitative or vice versa. So do take that into mind when you are considering your research. The last and final piece of advice I would like to give all of you is to consider breaking down your dissertation into small actionable steps. So it is very easy to feel overwhelmed, like, oh my goodness, I have to write 15,000 word essay in like a given short amount of time, and then I have work, I have so many other commitments, how am I gonna sit down and really write it? So what I usually advise students, or perhaps anybody who wants to take up a huge project, is to really be micro-ambitious. Consider perhaps breaking down your dissertation paper into segments, and then tell yourself, say, hey, every 2-3 weeks, I'm gonna get this particular section down first. So literature review is usually the first part of the paper, apart from introduction. So literature review requires you to do a bit of research before you actually park down whatever you feel or whatever you want to write about, and it's kind of a hefty part of your dissertation paper. I wouldn't say 2 to 3 weeks, that's easily done. Perhaps you can consider maybe, I will take like a month, 1.5 months to do my lit review. But then for methodology and results, perhaps it's more of a month. So you really have got to kind of vary the approach and strategy that you wish to undertake when it comes to specific segments, and then force yourself to stick to deadlines. So that is very, very important, because for something so huge like a 15,000 word dissertation paper, amidst your other commitments, it is very, very important to keep to deadlines. If you don't keep to the deadlines that you yourself have kind of imposed, I would say then there is no point having those deadlines, and there's a very high likelihood you'll never be able to finish that paper of yours. So I have heard of individuals or certain colleagues, they actually took like 4 years to complete their paper because really they just couldn't get down to sitting down and doing a paper. So if you really want to finish it, you really need to make sure you have a plan, okay, and stick to that plan, you know. But do give yourself a little bit of leeway as well if your plan falls short, because I mean things happen along the way. So give yourself perhaps, you know, a bit of time to recover and then get back to the deadline again. Okay, that's very, very important. And I would say that what also helped as well is to ensure that your supervisor is really, really okay with to and fro deadlines. Okay, that is very, very important, because that's from my personal opinion or personal standpoint, where when I had my new supervisor, she was very okay with me going back and forth with her every 3-4 weeks, you know. So I thought that really, really helped, because in case if that particular segment was just all over the place, I knew that I needed to do something about it right away, rather than like, wait until like half a year later, then you realize, oh crap, you know, my lit review has a huge major flaw to it, you know, and that could be very late, too late into your dissertation process already. So do get a prof as well who is on the same mentality and mindset as you when it comes to meeting deadlines, setting deadlines, and sticking to these deadlines, because I think that is also very, very important, just as important as the plan that you have set in store for yourself. Hi guys, I'm Eunice. Do show us your support by pressing the like and subscribe button. Also, let us know in the comment section down below if you have had any similar experiences as I did, and those of you who perhaps may feel a little bit overwhelmed, may feel a bit stressed out, or perhaps you felt that dissertation was a breeze, let us know in the comment section down below. And for those of you who are currently going through the dissertation process, you may feel a little bit resentful, regretful, possibly overwhelmed by every single little thing out there, but trust me, it will get easier and things will get better. So I'll see you in my next video. Bye! What? No, pressing the like and subscribe button, liking and subscribing the button. You can't like and subscribe the button. I love it. I like it.